All right, today we're going to be talking about how to make agents reliable and how that actually makes you money. So, when I'm building some of these systems for businesses, these are the three things that I like to think through in order to make my systems and agents actually reliable. So, the first we have prompting, the second we have context, and then finally we have something called gates. So within prompting, we're going to talk about the structure, giving the examples, and then also breaking down certain sections. Then we're going to go into context engineering, so data, documents, and evaluations. And finally, I'm going to explain what gates are, so that can be human in the loop gates or agent in the loop, and then litmus tests. And at the end of it, you'll be very happy.
All right, to start things off, let's talk about prompting and just kind of some best practices and things that I think of when it comes to actually prompting my agents and making sure I'm getting a good output and reliability every single time. So over here, I just have one of my most recent workflows. This is a simple auto quoting agent for residential construction companies. And then the prompt in it is pretty simple, but also demonstrates kind of how I think about prompting my agents. So always start off with a role, and this is where I basically just give a very high level overview of the tasks that needs to be done, just in a couple of sentences. So you are a quoting agent working for a residential construction company. It is your job to analyze data from an Airtable form submission containing customer-filled info on a new project that they want done, and generate an accurate potential timeline plus pricing quote for their project. Boom, roll. And then I'll go into tasks, and the next section will either be tasks or goals. If it's a agent that needs to do a repeatable process over and over again, I'll just get straight into tasks. If it's, say, an agent that needs to pick the best option out of a couple of different possible paths, meaning if it's an agent that maybe has to route a query down a certain path line of sub-agents, that's where I would basically introduce goals before my tasks. And I will show you a better example of goals on a different agent that's prompted. So for tasks, I do sequential order in exactly how I want it to receive the data and then carry out its actions. So first one, I always say just read incoming project data from the Airtable form. That's in the user message up here. And then I say assemble a rough list of tasks needed in order to achieve the project. And then call the pricing data Airtable tool to have grounded real-world data on labor and material costs. And then I say calculate a rough timeline, estimated project cost for the project. And then finally, based on the project description, create a detailed image prompt to generate a visual to go along with the quote. And something here that is really important to kind of double click on is, so this last step, step 5, says based on the project description, create a detailed image prompt to generate a visual. Now, there's a lot of ways that can be interpreted. I mean, that's a pretty unclear and general direction. So when it comes to tasks that could be interpreted in many different types of ways, it's really important that you go and basically break them down further within your prompt. So in this example, it's simply just a image prompting guidelines that I have right under it. And I go down and basically give it a whole list of how I want the image to be prompted and how I want the image to be created and what style, to make sure that all of the images that are generated look similar. And then finally, after you're kind of done going through and breaking down tasks that could be interpreted in a couple of different ways, you want to go and always do your output requirements if you have a specific output requirement. So I always want the agent to output data like this. You always need to say respond with valid JSON or only JSON. And another big thing to remember is in your output requirements, you want the JSON that's in your prompt to match the structured output parser JSON. Yeah, so that's kind of a good example of a simpler one. Let's now go dive into maybe a bit more complex prompt. Okay, here's a bit more complex and nuanced sort of prompt where the agent has a lot of instructions and has to do a lot more thinking. There's a couple of different ways to actually guarantee success in a prompt that's or in a task that's as convoluted as this. So to kind of give you an overview of what's happening, let's just read the role. So you are a master schedule builder for Thurston County Construction. Each run receives exactly one task with a task name, duration of hours, and dependencies, plus the project name, project ID, and project color. Your sole focus is to flesh out the task details based on resource scarcity, which means crew availability, crew skills, and calendar availability, to create a task that is ready to be added to the master schedule. Once you have created the task, pass the data along to the next step in the chain. So essentially what this guy does in this workflow is he takes data of let's say like some type of new construction project, and he has to read all of these tasks and figure out how to schedule them into a real live construction calendar. And there's basically what this guy is supposed to be doing is a lot of work that a project manager would actually do on the day-to-day. So how do you sum up the entire job of a project manager with all of the, decades of years of experience and kind of tiny nuanced thought into one prompt? It's really hard to do. And realistically, it's going to take a lot more than just this prompt to be able to get it to achieve that type of level, but we can get pretty damn close. So similar structure. We have that role, and then we have the tasks. So I'll kind of just go over it pretty quickly here. So read the incoming task data and start by reading the incoming task details, including all relevant columns. So we have over here, we start to tell it to use certain tools that it has. So project start date and crew preferences, use your current projects tool to find projects, desired start date, and then also check the crew preferences column for any crew assignment requests. And then access crew data, that's the next step. And then finally, or view master schedule, and then assign crew and schedule tasks. So it goes down in sequential order of what should be triggered in what event. But then we actually go down here and label the tools that they have access to. So when it reads here and says, the crew data tool, we also make sure that we have a lot of documentation on what the tool is used for right here. I always like to make sure that the naming is completely consistent. So if we click out here, you'll see that the crew data is named crew data, get master schedule is named that. It doesn't really matter if you do underscores or not. It just matters that your names for the tools are all consistent in the prompts. And I also like to keep them in quotation marks to know that, to tell the agent that it's a tool or a name that we're talking about. Okay, so yeah, so we have the tools basically defined there. So in this case, when it's an agent that, is going to have 3 or 4 different tools, I'll do the role, tasks, then kind of go and break down each tool that they have, and then I'll start to break down kind of the difficult steps. So in this case, let's see, in task 2, project start and crew preferences. Use your current projects tool to find the project's desired start date and also check the crew preferences column. This is a name of a column in some type of data sheet. For any crew assignment requests. If there are preferences, refer to the crew preferencing section for how to handle these assignments. So the agent will read this and say, okay, we should go down to the crew preferencing or the crew scheduling lot or the crew preferencing section, to basically have more data on that. So right over here, from basically here to here is a whole section on what crew preferencing is and how the agent should actually reason and think about it, So, this prompt really kind of demonstrates when you're looking at your outputs and what your agent is actually achieving based on your first initial prompts. What you always want to be doing is just measuring how far out you are from your desired goal, and then basically trying to read back through your prompt and figure out maybe what are some areas where the agent could be misinterpreting it or it needs more guidance. A good rule of thumb is that you only want to change one thing in your prompt at a time, so you have a bit more of a control variable. If you change 5 different things in the prompt and suddenly it works, you don't know really what worked, or if it breaks, you don't really know what was the thing that still made it break. So you do an incremental process. So if I started with just my tasks, my role, my tasks, my tools, and then a structured output, and then from there I basically assessed. I kept having the agent run through and I assessed its outputs and then saw, okay, well, it didn't do crew preferencing at all. So I need to have an entire section dedicated to what it means to even think about that. And then also, it was scheduling crew in the wrong times. So I needed to go break that down further. And then finally, I think there was, just some more scheduling window stuff. Another thing that this prompt really well, or that this prompt demonstrates pretty well, is my examples section. So in pretty much any of your prompts where they need to achieve a certain thing, you need to give the agent good and bad examples. So in this case, I had ChatGPT write up some good and bad examples based on what I told it was a good output and what I told it was a bad output, and then it extrapolated that into 5 different good examples and 5 different bad ones. So we'll see here. So good, in-house framing task. We see the task name and all of it shows it a good example of an output, and it tells it why. So this one is good because a subcontractor electrical is on the weekend. I'm going to talk about an electrical rough-in. This one shows an apprentice plus a team lead being paired. And then we have a cool preference override, which is a good example. And then we go in here and say, okay, here are some bad examples. The bad examples are really kind of the key. If you have your agent accidentally outputting is outputting things that you don't really want it to do, if you give an example and say this is bad, then you're just going to get a lot more bulletproof. You're going to get a lot more bulletproof and reliable outputs from your agents. Yeah. And then I just kind of sometimes will throw a final goal in there. But, kind of some key things to take away are you want to start with your role, your tasks, your tools, break down tasks that are too generalized or don't have enough specific data or specific steps into how the agent should actually reason about it. You want to break those down in different sections under your tools section, and then you want to give it an idea of what it needs to output, and then finally some examples of good and bad. Really, the best thing you can do for good prompting is just read your prompts. It sounds stupid, but a lot of people will have, ChatGPT, just say, hey, write the prompt for this agent. And a lot of times, ChatGPT doesn't really understand exactly what a good output is for your system. And usually that happens because you don't also understand what a good output for your system is. So a lot of times when you're building these systems, you're also working at defining what is a good output and kind of what is your end goal with the system. So spend a lot of time in here just, in your head thinking, how would I instruct another human or another employee to complete this task, and then describe it in painstaking detail to make it, so an entry-level employee could do it, and then our stupid AI agents could also do them. Okay, there's been a lot of talk about context engineering as opposed to prompt engineering. And I was reading through a lot of seeing these YouTube videos on context engineering to kind of understand what these people were talking about. And I got pretty angry because it made me realize that a lot of people who are building agents were literally like putting 4 sentences in a prompt and giving some tools, and then not understanding why these agents weren't doing what they wanted to do. Where as opposed, when I was building these like master schedule things, I'm building from the idea that these agents are like have access to, just way much more knowledge all at once than we do. And it was basically how could I give it certain resources and certain directions and guidance to where it could narrow down its intelligence to just focus on one goal or one task, to the best of its ability. And the way that I do that, and the way that I have been doing that, is through context engineering, which basically just means giving the agent sufficient enough outside context, that's separated from just its own training data, so that it can actually accomplish the goal. And so let's get into an example of exactly kind of how I did this. So this is still within that same master. Okay, we are zooming in now. That is awesome. Can we zoom out? Okay, I guess we're going to do a lethal face card for the rest of the video. Let's chill. So when it comes to this agent, actually I really don't like that. We're going to zoom out. Okay, we're back. So this guy is an agent that is supposed to look at some type of Airtable form or some type of virtual form that has data for a construction project, and then understand how to build the correct tasks that need to be done in order to build that. So let's say you wanted a plumbing project done, or actually let's look at what data is in here. Maybe we can see. Okay, so there is an additional unit build, fake data in here. So you can see build a new detached 1-bedroom ADU on the rear of property with a full kitchen, bath, and laundry room. So the agent, this guy's job is to basically take all that data and turn it into, he's supposed to take all of this data about, the new project, and then turn it into an array of tasks. So as you'll see here, the first thing that it would have to do is site access prep, then utility coordination. Let's go back to JSON, it's a little bit easier there. Utility coordination, then we'll start demolition, concrete pour, foundation inspection, and then all the way up until finally
a final inspection, so this is a lot, and how if you just ran this and basically gave it a minimal prompt, which we didn't give it anything but a minimal prompt, but say you gave it just a role and a couple of tasks to do, it would fail miserably. So what we had to do in this scenario is we need to give it sufficient training/context in order to get it to think like a project manager would. And that's where I gave it this tool. It's just the Google Doc tool of a crash course on construction management, pretty much. So it has some template task library. So if we're doing a kitchen remodel, here's a very templatized version of what tasks need to go in what order. And I have it for pretty much all of the common residential construction projects that they would do. And then I have different types of dependencies and sequencing rules. So I took like a whole day and, networked with some actual construction managers, consulted ChatGPT to help me create this database. Here are some estimates for, time. How does time actually go into square footage? So if you have 500 square foot, how long should demolition take? Here are some actual rules about work days that are specific to the business we were building this for, and just some more data like that. So this is an example of that type of context engineering where you give an agent access to some type of outside data that's, not just its prompt or its user message as a way for it to understand and accomplish a certain goal better. I like to think about it like, these agents have access to the whole internet, all of that data, but we need to give them certain types of resources to basically narrow in their focus and use whatever pathways they already have in their existing data and just use that for better outputs and better responses. Okay, and finally we're going to come back to this project task creation to demonstrate the final method of creating agents that actually will do what you want them to do and achieve more reliable results. And that's using something that's called gates or litmus tests. I think Anthropic refers to it as gates, but it's pretty much giving it at certain points in the system, there need to be check marks to make sure that an agent's output is desired or that it's actually the right thing. So if we come over here, we see that we have a litmus test revision logic. So how I built the system was, it gets an array of, say, 25 different tasks, and I make them all get inserted one at a time using a loop over. And the reason why I do that is because I want every single task that the master scheduler basically schedules in, I want that to be graded one at a time through this different agent. So this first agent's job, if we open it up, we'll see you are a quality assurance agent responsible for the scheduling operations of a construction company. Your primary duty is to ensure that all tasks scheduled into the master calendar meet basic quality standards before approval. Each task that comes through needs to be checked by you to make sure that it has accurate time scheduling and crew assignments. So like literally, I created this agent because the tasks that this guy was creating, it would schedule crew members before the actual company start times or on weekends or sometimes after. Other things that it would do, if we go back and we read, sometimes it would schedule certain crew members without a team lead, so it would put apprentices on certain tasks that were out of their abilities, and we just wanted to check to make sure that each task that was being assigned actually passed this. So we can actually run through it and see what we got here. So let's see, we have the first task, which is a site access prep, John ADU build. We're going to go ahead and just kind of watch what happens. So we hits both his tools. He's going to go to this litmus test, which is going to be checking our master schedule data. And we saw that, okay, he gave it a pass grade. So it's scheduled within the allowed windows. Apprentice Tim is paired with team lead Mike C as required. And then after that, it went to the final task insertion, which basically put that into the final calendar. This is funny. So also, let's here's a good example of we got a false. So let's see. So we got the utility coordination is scheduled from 12 p.m. to 4 o'clock p.m., which means the end time is after the allowed window of 3:30 p.m. Both assigned crew members, Matt and T. Brandon, satisfy the requirement that apprentice. So basically, the only thing that needs to be changed here is the time. So it can't be from 12 to 4. It needs to be from 12 to 3:30. And it's kind of curious why this guy let's see what happened here. Oh, I think a reason why I did this is because when you go to make an agent actually have a structured output, if it wants to generate from an example, you can't just have a schema that, basically says, that basically gives it like a subtext, that basically gives it like text telling what should go here. It needs to be like a fake live example of what should go here. So let's go ahead and see if we can, let's go ahead and just change this real quick. So I just went ahead and, as you can see, I put some interior painting, put some like fake data in here. We'll see if this still errors or if it can now kind of output and understand how it needs to output. Okay, and then it came out here, and as you can see, it changed the end time to shifted end time from 16:00 to 15:30 to comply with in-house scheduling. So there's basically a live example of this revision agent logic. Did I accidentally cut that off? We don't want to cut that off. This revision agent logic actually working. So from here, it would basically just go in and reset this new task with the new time. Oh my gosh. And then it comes through our litmus test, who gives it a pass now because it's been changed. And then finally, we should be able to see it go and be able to get passed to this final task inserter to make sure it actually goes through. And there we go. So in that case, it would go through and finally insert it. So I kind of put these gates in places that make sense. It's really important to, sometimes set up gates to be human in the loop and not agent in the loop. For this case, I've done a lot of testing, and I found that a lot of times the revisions that the agent was making were accurate, and it wasn't hallucinating on the corrections. So it's still up for evaluation and making sure that this is a valid way to solve it. So I hope that has been helpful. We went over some basic prompting structure, what you should include in your prompts to get your agents to actually understand the task that they're supposed to be doing. What is context engineering, and a live example of what type of context a agent might need. In this case, it was a Google Doc just filled with a crash course on how to be a project manager. And then finally, trying to think about where you should put gates or litmus tests in your N8N workflows to basically have periodic checks to make sure that an agent's output is up to your standards or pass/failing evaluations. So, yeah.